All right, let's dive right into what is arguably the first and most famous family drama in history, the story of Cain and Abel. We're going to break down this ancient story using the incredible analysis of Dr. Kenneth Mathews to see what it really tells us about worship, jealousy, and where humanity was headed right from the start. And right out of the gate, you're hit with this massive contradiction, right? You've got this moment that's supposed to be about devotion to God, and somehow it just completely unravels into the first murder. How does that even happen? That's the core question we're tackling today. So first, let's get the lay of the land. Humanity is no longer in Eden. They're starting over. And yeah, there's a little bit of hope. The family's growing. But Dr. Mathews points out that something pretty dark is already taking root. Sin isn't just sticking around, it's actually getting worse, ramping up with each new generation. Which brings us to the main event, the offerings. Now, you've probably heard the theory that Cain's offering got rejected just because it was vegetables and not an animal sacrifice like Abel's. But when you look closer at the text, you realize something much deeper is going on. It really wasn't about what they brought, but the heart behind the gift. Okay, check out the language here, because this is where it gets really interesting. Cain brings some of the fruits of the soil. It's kind of vague, right? Just some stuff. But Abel, he brings fat portions from some of the firstborn. In other words, the best of the best. Dr. Mathews argues this shows us exactly what was in their hearts. Abel gave his absolute best. But Cain? Well, it feels like he was just checking a box, giving the bare minimum. And here's the linguistic kicker that really seals the deal. The Hebrew word used for both of their offerings is mincha. Why does that matter? Because it's the exact same word used later in the book of Leviticus to describe perfectly acceptable grain offerings to God. So the idea that God was just like, nope, no vegetables, well, it just doesn't fly. The problem was something else entirely. And this quote just nails it. The real conflict, the real problem, it didn't start out in the field. It started inside of Cain. It was all about his motivation, his inner life, his heart. That's where things first went wrong. So, how in the world do you get from a rejected offering to a full-blown murder? Let's trace this out, because Cain's reaction is just as important as the offering itself. You know, when God called him out, Cain had a choice. He could have looked inward, maybe asked why, tried to do better, but he didn't. Instead, the text says his face was downcast. He was furious, burning with jealousy. God even warns him that sin is crouching at his door, basically telling him, you can master this. But he chose not to. He let it master him instead. Now, Dr. Mathews has this fantastic little analogy for what's going on inside Cain. He calls it the pizza cutter principle. Think about it. A pizza cutter is an amazing tool for cutting pizza. It's what it was designed for. But what happens if you try to use it to, I don't know, cut bathroom tile? It's not just going to fail, it's going to get destroyed. Our desires are kind of like that. God gives them to us, and when they're used for their intended purpose, within His will, they're great. But when we hijack them for our own selfish goals, they become destructive. Cain's desire for acceptance turned into a weapon because it was fueled by envy, not sincere worship. And then, after the murder, God confronts Cain. Where is your brother Abel? And Cain fires back with this question that is just echoed through the ages. It's not a real question, is it? It's defensive, it's sarcastic, and it's a complete attempt to dodge any responsibility. But the answer to his question, from the Bible's perspective, is a resounding yes. Of course you're your brother's keeper. In that ancient world, family and community weren't just nice ideas. They were the very fabric of your existence. Denying that responsibility was like denying a part of yourself. It was a rejection of your duty to both your family and to God. Okay, so a line has been crossed. There have to be consequences. But what's so fascinating here is God's response. It's not one note. It's this incredible mix of a harsh judgment and a completely surprising act of mercy. A curse and a grace. So let's look at the curse first. And wow, is it severe? Cain is the first person in the Bible to be cursed directly by God. The very ground he farms, the source of his flawed offering, is now cursed specifically for him. He's kicked out, doomed to be a wanderer. And he's driven east of Eden, which in Genesis is code for moving farther and farther away from God's presence. It's a dark echo of what happened to his parents. And yet, after all that, after a premeditated murder, God spares his life. Let that sink in. By any law, especially the ones that would come later, the penalty was death. period. Instead, God puts a protective mark on Cain so that no one can get revenge on him. It's this absolutely stunning moment of grace, right in the middle of a terrible judgment.
But the story doesn't just stop with Cain wandering off. It actually sets up two completely different futures. Two legacies are born from this tragedy, establishing two paths that humanity can take. If you follow Cain's family line, that downward spiral of sin just keeps getting worse. It starts with Cain's violence. A few generations later, his descendant Lamech introduces polygamy, another break from the ideal. And then it all culminates in this chilling poem called The Song of the Sword, where Lamech actually brags about his brutal, over-the-top vengeance.
I mean, listen to this boast from Lamech. He's heard the story of God protecting Cain, and he twists it into a personal license for insane, unlimited revenge. He's not just continuing Cain's violence, he's multiplying it, celebrating it.
But thank goodness, Cain's legacy isn't the only one. To replace Abel, Eve is given a new son, Seth, and his family line is defined by something totally different. It's through Seth's descendants that people begin to call on the name of the Lord. It represents a turning back, a move toward worship and community with God.
And this chart just lays it out perfectly. You've got the line of Cain, defined by murder, violence, and moving away from God. And then you have the line of Seth, defined by worship, righteousness, and moving back toward God's plan. Two brothers, two legacies, two totally different directions for humanity. So, what's the big point of all this? Well, this story basically gives us a pattern, a blueprint that we're going to see over and over again in Genesis. Step 1, sin pops up and threatens God's whole plan. Step 2, God brings a judgment to stop the rebellion from spreading. But, and this is key, Step 3, God always shows grace and preserves a small group, a remnant, to carry his plan forward. We see it right here, and we're definitely going to see it again with Noah and the flood. Which leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question. This ancient story lays out two foundational paths for humanity, one built on envy and self-interest, the other on worship and community. And it forces us to look at our own lives, all these thousands of years later, and ask, which one of those legacies are we building?